How does an egotistical, maniacal, unqualified, power-hungry man, so weak in his own self-esteem that he wants everyone to bow to him all the time, this child in a man's body who uses the threat of violence and incitement to create influence and ease his way to complete authority, how does such a demagogue come to power? Doesn't everyone else see through him? This is the most profound and relevant question today when we're faced with the holiday of Purim. What we learn in the Megillah is that the king of Persia, who gave Haman his job as prime minister, didn't really share these terrible values with Haman, but rather he was simply not bothered too terribly much by such underhanded and detestable tactics. He simply believed that Haman could keep him safe, keep his kingdom in order, preserve his power, and ease his way. It's a remarkably modern and nuanced story that our Megillah tells us every year, one in which someone is drawn to a violent, charismatic, and extreme leader out of a sense of fear and vulnerability. I suspect we can all agree that it was unconscionable for the king of Persia to prioritize his fear or sense of frustration over the personal safety of individuals in his community or the moral integrity of his kingdom. That's why the king doesn't get the cheers that Esther does when we read the Megillah, as we will on Wednesday night. He is no hero. He is weak, and he makes a serious error in judgment in granting Haman this power. Elevating someone this hateful as a leader is to undermine everything else he purported to be or to believe in. He is irredeemable as a character in this story of ours. Research actually shows a similar phenomenon in Germany in the early 1930s. We may ask how the Nazi Party and its ferocious leader came to power there. Evidence shows that many Germans voted for them, not so much out of strong anti-Semitism, though certainly it was present. Many voted the way that they did because of economic concerns brought about by a Great Depression that plagued Germany and the world. The millions of voters that in that election prioritized their own perceived economic health over the physical survival of their neighbors. This choice is also, I suspect we all agree, indefensible. We all know they should have taken their new would-be chancellor at his word, seen him for what he was, believed that he would make good on his violent and radical threats. No sense of frustration among them justified their support of him. Tragically, millions of people paid the price for the choice of ordinary Germans in that election. Our country is at such a pivotal point during this election cycle. In analyzing the support networks of various candidates, it is clear that many, many people, millions in fact, are leading with their sense of frustration, their anger at their circumstances, rather than listening and reacting to the violent, radical threats of their chosen candidate. In a study published recently by the AFL-CIO, it was found that people, quote, are much more frightened than they are bigoted. The study found that people are drawn to a certain attitude, a certain way of thinking, a free-for-all way of talking, and they are prioritizing the sense of security that accompanies this bluster over the very real threat that their candidate presents. In the Jewish community, we find ourselves in a unique position. From the time of Haman to his modern-day iteration in 1930s Germany, throughout our history, in fact, we have been the targets of such tough talk. So we rarely have to ask ourselves, am I strong enough to resist it on my neighbor's behalf? But we are in that position now. We are not the primary targets of hateful speech in this election cycle. though we're never far from the center, unfortunately. This is a moment of choice, and it is in moments when we have choice that we discover what we're actually made of. Our Judaism may be ambiguous about many things, but it is not ambiguous about a Jew's responsibility to make tough moral choices, to take a stand, to speak our mind, to identify right and wrong, and to fight for the vulnerable. That is our legacy. Psalm 73 described such a moment when we're faced with a leader of despicable character. These are words from our Tanakh, our Bible. Pride is their necklace. They clothe themselves in violence. They scoff and speak with malice. With arrogance, they threaten oppression. Their mouths, though, lay claim to heaven, and their tongues take possession of the earth, and therefore their people turn to them and drink up waters in abundance. Such a person, the psalm says, must be put in his place. It continues, surely you place them on a slippery slope, God. You cast them down to ruin. How suddenly they must be destroyed. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor and a modern moral compass for the Jewish people, famously said, we must take sides. Neutrality helps the oppressor, never the victim. Silence encourages the tormentor, never the tormented. Sometimes we must interfere. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. Wherever men and women are persecuted because of their race or religion or political views, that place must, at that moment, become the center of the universe. Perhaps Rabbi Eric Yaffe, former leader of our Reform movement and one of its spokespeople, said it most clearly in his article in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz this week. He wrote, we Jews who have borne the burden of oppression must forever be about inclusion. And we know better than anyone that those forces that come after one of us in the morning are looking for the rest of us in the afternoon of the same day. There can be no confusion in our sources about how to prioritize when people's lives, people's dignity, the ethical fabric of our society are on the line. To be worthy of the name Jew, we must use our voices as groggers that drown out evil speech in our midst. There is no political nuance here. There is only moral imperative. This temple will forever be a safe space in which every person, regardless of political leaning, can call this congregation home, can find guidance in his or her Jewish heritage. But when the very principles and values of that heritage come under attack, Judaism and this congregation must stand for more than a personal spiritual path. We must stand for a moral path, an eternal sense of justice, and an unfailing sense of empathy. If we sacrifice these at the critical moment, we tarnish beyond repair the legacy that was handed down to us, and we forfeit our right to stand among the righteous of our people. On Wednesday night, we will read the following words in the Megillah. It says, "Do not think," Mordecai warns Esther, "that you will escape in the king's house more than all the other Jews. For if you are silent at this time, then relief and deliverance will arrive for the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows? Perhaps you have attained this position of power for just such a time as this." These words, like so many in our tradition, transcend their original context and stare us in the face in our modern day. Do not think, they warn us, that we can keep our heads in the sand, ignore the threats of oppressors simply because an oppressor is powerful or charismatic or a buffoon. In the words of Dr. King, a threat to freedom anywhere is a threat to freedom everywhere. And perhaps our Megillah says to us, our difficult history, our cultural and religious commitment to finding seeds of justice in hard situations, Our courage and our compassion have prepared us to be leaders at just this critical moment. So may this be our prayer tonight and onward. Each of us must become a grogger during this season of election, so that the name of the oppressor, the modern-day Haman, wherever he lurks, is drowned out by the sound of our righteousness. Shabbat shalom.